Hey everyone, my name is Brian Matiash and I'd like to welcome you to episode number 2 of On1 Inspiration. And we've got our first guest host. My good friend Liz LePage is joining us, and you've probably watched some of her videos because she's created a lot of them for On1 in the past. She's a very good friend of mine. Her father Rick is a very good friend of mine. They're both fantastic photographers. You know, Liz has been educated in photography and she bleeds photography. It's really wonderful to have someone like her join the program. Now what I'm really excited about is that Liz is going to be working on a type of photography that I wasn't sure if we'd have, and that's animal or pet photography. She's going to start the session off by showing you some tips, some really nice practical tips if you want to dabble in animal pet photography yourself, and then she's going to bring an image over into On1 Photo 10 to apply her own personal touch to it. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's check it out.
Hey guys, this is Liz LePage here, and I am going to be doing a perfect inspiration episode for you all about working with horses in your photography. Now, I've been a horseback rider for a really long time, and that's actually how I got involved in photography, was taking pictures at horse shows when I used to compete in high school. Now, I still ride and I have access to a lot of horses, and I go to a lot of horse shows, so this is something that I really, really love to do. So before we jump into editing, and I talk a little bit about that, I wanted to give you guys some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years about working with horses and other animals. Now, the first thing is personalizing portraits with pets is one of my favorite things. Now, this girl, Megan, and we're going to be editing her photo later and she'll pop up through this slideshow. She wanted to get some graduation portraits done before she went off to med school. And in the process, we got both of her horses involved. Now, she's been a horseback rider for a really long time, and this was something that was really important to her. And this can work in all different types of portraits. I ended up getting some great headshots of her, but I also got some wonderful photos of her and her animals. This works great for senior portraits, graduation portraits, engagement photography, and even weddings. I've had a couple of weddings where people actually bring their pets along, which I think is really fun. So if you have a client who you're going to be working with, definitely ask if they have a pet that they might be interested in bringing along. Action shots are a wonderful way to showcase an animal. Horses are incredible athletes, as are a lot of other animals. Horse shows are a really fun way to take a look at some of this athleticism, and action shots with fast shutter speeds can really show off how intense these animals can be. Now, the photograph on the right is actually the same girl, Megan, and that same horse you were just looking at, and all of the shots that I got of her at a horse show, I included in her graduation bundle. So she got her headshots, the portraits of her and her horses, and then I also included some of the shots that I took of her in a competition. This works for all different types of animals as well. Dogs can be incredibly athletic, and dog shows are a fun way to showcase that same intensity. Working with an assistant is also a wonderful way to work with animals. Animals cannot understand most of the time when you're trying to tell them to pay attention, to look over here, to keep their ears forward. Horses are prey animals, and so a lot of times they can get a little skittish and scared, and so having an assistant there to keep their attention is really helpful. Megan and her horse Lynx had her mother along, and her mom had a bushel of apples that she carried around and kept cracking so that the horse would pay attention, and she stood right next to me the entire time. So there were a couple of photos where I intentionally took a picture with her mom in the photo so that I could show you guys that I was working with someone else. This is a really, really great option. If you don't always have access to an assistant, I've been able to master it, and it takes a little bit of time, but being able to hold things like apples or tennis balls or squeaky toys in one hand and your camera in the other. It's a great way to make sure that the animal is paying attention to you. Now, along those same lines, ears are much more expressive than eyes most of the time when you're working with animals. Ears are their way of indicating to the world what's going on. When their ears are forward, they're paying attention, they're alert, and they're active. And that's how most people like their horses photographed. Now, the picture on the left, one of the horse's ears is sideways, which means that it's not paying attention to me. it's paying attention to something off in the distance. And this can be really difficult, especially when you're taking pictures like this one with multiple horses. Getting 2 horses to pay attention is very difficult. So with a little bit of photo magic, on the right-hand side, I was able to edit the picture and make it look like both of the ears were forward at the same time. It ended up saving the picture, and it was something that she really loved. Otherwise, this photo would have been unusable. So sometimes you have to get a little creative when working with these pictures, and especially when working with animals. Now, speaking of being creative, you don't have to just take straight-on shots. Getting close up, like the picture on the right of the horseback rider's boot, it's one of my favorite pictures, and the client absolutely loved it. She ended up framing it and putting it on her wall. It was one of her favorites from the show that I photographed, and you can't even tell that it's her and her horse. So this is a really, really fun way to play with animals when you're working with them. You can also take far away shots. You don't necessarily need one up close and personal. You can also take one like the one on the left of the horse and rider as more of a silhouette. This is them in more of a natural environment when they're getting ready to ride, and it shows you more of the environment that they're in at the time. So you can get really, really fun with how you take these pictures. You don't always have to do it straight on. Now, all of these tips work with other animals as well. When you're working with dogs and cats, ears forward and having them paying attention to you is the best way to showcase an animal. Things like squeaky toys. This photo in the middle is of a dog named Nelson, and he absolutely loves squeaky tennis balls. So I had one in my left hand, and I was squeaking it while I was taking the picture. And this is a really, really great way to get dogs' attentions. Treats work really well too. For cats, sometimes you're dealing with something that's a little bit more difficult, and so if they're a little bit younger, like the kitten in the right-hand picture, I was playing with one of those feather toys, and the cat was super excited about it, and I was able to get this picture while I was waving the toy on the left-hand side. So any of these tips that work with horses are going to work with animals that you interact with on a regular basis. So let's go ahead and talk about the editing process. I'm going to be working exclusively in the photo suite today. So I'm going to go ahead and take this picture here. We're going to open it up in Effects. Now, there are quite a few ways that you can edit your pictures, and presets are a great way to do that, but I want to walk you guys through some of the selective adjustments that I do when working with animals. The first thing that we're going to work on is color correction. Most of the time when I'm photographing horses and dogs specifically, I'm working outdoors on grass, in forests, lots of trees and lots of greenery. And in the process, it can create a greenish yellow reflection on animal fur. This also works with people as well. So this tip is something that can be great when you're working with portraits outside, is sometimes you get kind of a greenish tint to their skin, and that's just the reflection from their surroundings. You'll see in this photo, the horse's chest over here on the left is a little too green. It looks very awkward. So what I want to do is remove that green hue. Now, the reason why I'm calling this a selective adjustment is there's greenery in the background, and there's greenery kind of down here below because they're standing on grass, and we need to keep all of that. So that's when masking is going to come into play. Now, let's go ahead and start. On the right-hand side, we're going to click to add a filter. We're going to use the color enhancer, and it's automatically going to apply an auto color adjustment. We're going to go ahead and turn that off and scroll down to the color range drop-down menu. Now this allows us to edit the color channels separately, and this is what we're going to be doing. Now, even though that hue on his chest looks green, it's actually yellow. Sounds a little crazy, but most of those lime greens are going to fall under the yellow category. We're going to edit both of them, but we're going to start out with yellow. Now, let's go ahead and take a look right here and pay attention to this as I adjust some of these yellow changes. We're going to start off with the hue. Instead of making it more green, we're going to move the hue slider to the left to make it more orange. Now, if you're really looking right here, the before and after is pretty crazy. It goes from kind of awkward and green to a lot warmer and orangey, and that's exactly what we're going for. You can also come in and you can darken it. Sometimes that yellow-green tint can add a little bit of brightness. So sometimes I like to go through and darken the yellows just a little bit. And then if it's even still too intense for you, you can desaturate it a bit as well. I'm going to do a very similar thing to the green channel. I'm going to go ahead and select that. I'm going to desaturate it just a little bit. I'm going to darken it just a little bit, and I'm going to change the hue and make it a bit more yellow-orangey. Now, the horse and rider are looking great, but my background doesn't look so great. This is where we're going to mask out that background. On the left-hand side of the screen, I'm going to go ahead and select my masking brush. We're going to go ahead and paint out. I'm going to start out just by making my brush bigger and making big, broad strokes. And as I do, along the background, and especially along the side, all of those greens are going to start coming back. So this is really, really useful. Now, what I'm going to end up needing to do is get a very tight mask. We're going to be reusing this mask later. To do that, one of the things that really is great is being able to take a look at your mask, and it's this small little circle in a square icon on the bottom left of your image. This shows you a red overlay of the mask that you're creating, and this is really helpful when you're trying to get in close with all of those tiny little spots here. The other thing that's really great is going up to your tool options bar and accessing your perfect brush. This is an edge detection brush that works really well, especially along the edges of your subjects. So it's selectively choosing colors to remove and leaving all of the colors that we want left alone completely fine. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the next couple of minutes. I'm going to use this perfect brush and create a great mask. All right. So one of the reasons why I sped this up is I wanted to take my time with this mask. This is going to be really useful because we're actually going to reuse it later, and that's really important. So we're going to go ahead and turn that mask view off, and all of a sudden all those greens in the background are looking great, and the foreground is looking a lot better. While I have my color enhancer open, I'm going to also increase the vibrance here. This is going to help quite a bit. We're going to make everything pop a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of warmth, just a tiny bit. And I'm going to go through and add another filter. Now, before we add another filter, I'm going to copy the mask that we just created so we can reuse it again. On the right-hand side of the color enhancer filter, there's a small mask view that we're going to click on, and it shows you a better close-up of what that mask looks like, and you'll see that there is a copy option. We're going to copy this mask to reuse it in a moment. We're going to click that Add Filter, and I'm going to scroll down, and we're going to apply some dynamic contrast here. Now, when you're working with animals, dynamic contrast is key. This is great. It adds a lot more intensity and shows off the features of the animal really well. Now we're going to have to adjust this dynamic contrast, and we also don't want it on the background. We like that softness in the background. So just like in the color enhancer, we're going to click on the mask view option. Right now the mask is black because we haven't added one, and we're going to click the paste button. All of a sudden that exact same mask is here, and we're just going to selectively adjust our foreground again. Now, underneath dynamic contrast, I suggest you pay a lot more attention to the small and medium sliders than you do the large sliders. You're working with people and animals, and people specifically don't always look great with that large contrast slider. So we're going to drop that down pretty low, closer to about 5, and I'm going to intensify the small and medium details here. Those are going to look a lot better than the large details. The other thing that's really great here is being able to adjust whites and blacks. If I need to do any highlight or shadow adjustments or add any intensity to the whites and blacks, this is a great time to do so. So we're going to go ahead and add some whites. We're going to add some blacks, and it'll just intensify that contrast a bit more. Now the next thing that we're going to do is click that Add Filter button one more time. And this time, we're going to click on that color enhancer one more time, except we're going to go through and we're going to do a cool little trick that I like to use. Click on that mask options box one more time. Click the paste button because we're going to paste that mask. Now, what we want to do is make a color adjustment to the background only. There's an invert button here that inverts the mask, and all of a sudden it leaves our foreground alone, and it's only going to apply adjustments to the background. Now I'm going to click that auto button off again, and I'm going to scroll down here back to that color range drop-down menu and select the green channel. Now this time, what I want to do is instead of desaturating the greens, we want to saturate them. We want the background to pop a lot more. So we're going to add the saturation up a little bit. I'm also going to take the hue and move that over to the right. I want my greens to be a little bit more blue. And then I'm also just going to go straight up to that vibrance slider and add that as well. We really want those colors to stand out. Now, selective adjustments are really important, but we're also going to apply a couple of overall adjustments. One of my favorites, especially when doing personal portraits like this one, is going to be the sunshine filter. It goes in, it adds contrast, you can add a little bit of warmth and glow to the image if you want to, and it lends itself really, really well. I'm going to drop the amount down a little bit because it's too intense, and I'm just going to add a tiny little bit of warmth to the overall image. Not too much, probably closer to 10 or 12, but just that overall orangey glow is really nice. The last thing that we're going to add for this portrait is going to be lens flare. Now, when you're working with animals, things can be really unpredictable. We were originally taking photos in a different field. We had to move because the horse was scared of something that it saw, and so we had to kind of reposition where we were going to be. My lighting situation went from really great to really tough. We had light coming in from behind, the sun was coming up, so it was really bright, and I really liked the idea of doing kind of a lens flare look with the light coming in from behind and adding that really cool halo effect. In the process, I realized that adding a lens flare would help intensify that and add kind of a cool effect to the photo. This can be really fun for unexpected situations like this one. When working with animals, unexpected situations happen all the time. So let's go ahead and click that lens flare. We're going to go ahead and choose the top-down portrait preset that's on the right-hand side. And then immediately I'm going to go down to the bottom and click this Show Rings button. I want to remove those brighter rings and I want to concentrate more on these brighter yellows and reds. Now, if you need to, you can adjust the size of the lens flare. I'm going to leave it really big. And then you can also adjust the amount. We can drop that down or we can intensify it even more. So this is going to be up to you. Now, I'm going to drop this down. And I'm also going to scroll down to the bottom here and select the shadow fade slider and move that over to the right. We want to fade out some of those shadows a little bit. Now, this looks a little strange, and I completely understand that. What we're going to do is, just like before, add a mask and remove it from the bottom and just leave it more in the background right up at the top. So let's go ahead and we're going to drop that opacity down a little bit. Click on that mask icon one more time and click paste. Now, just like before, that mask is on our foreground, not our background. So we're going to go ahead and invert the mask. Now, one of the things that can be really tough when working with lens flare is we do need to add it to our subjects a little bit. And that's where painting in can be really useful. So let's go up to our tool options bar with our masking brush. We're going to choose paint in. Make sure your feather is all the way up at 100 here, and then drop your opacity down to about 20 or 30. This will let us paint in those adjustments a little bit slower. And now all I'm going to do is just kind of click and paint right towards the top of the subjects. We want to clean up some of those harsher edges there, especially in areas where it's not going to make quite as much of a difference. And we're going to add just a little bit of color to those top sunnier parts. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger here and add a bit more color, and that's going to look really nice. We're not going overboard. We can still see our subjects really, really well, but it's just going to look a little bit more natural with that color popping out. If it's too much, you can always go back to your tool options bar, choose paint out, and remove it if you really don't like it in certain areas. But it's looking a lot cleaner and a lot more natural now that it's coming from behind, but it's not on the front of our subjects. I'm going to lower that opacity just a little bit more too. I want it to be just a touch softer, and that looks a lot nicer. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our before and after. This was the photo that we started out with. And this is the photo that we used with all of our selective adjustments. There's a lot of things that you can do when it comes to working with portraits that involve animals, but these are a couple of my favorite tips and tricks when you're editing these photos. Thanks for watching, guys.